Hi guys, welcome back to part 2 of Micah's Armored Rhino, part of a series I want to do called Micah Madness, where he gives me ideas for art projects. This being the first, and again, we stopped last time in the middle of the armor making, the good bits. I love doing this stuff. Um, it's a lot of fun. And basically, what I do with armor is I will start with a very basic tone, usually a darker tone, and make sure that it's a flat layer. That way, when I go into render, I can really start to make sure I'm getting the forms down, putting in the highlights where they need to be, and just really kind of experimenting as to where those are going to be, because armor it's a hard surface to render. If you don't have a reference, which I don't right now, naughty, then it is extremely difficult. You have to have a pretty prominent light source to kind of have an idea of how you're going to be rendering the light source and where those reflective properties on the metal are going to be coming from. So I'm just kind of putting in a base plate right now, kind of showing myself and giving myself an indication of that light source and where it's going to be. I will have to pull up references for this once I start to really get it down. But again, more of this is just a placeholder and helping me get an idea of where to go from here. So I actually did do a recording for this video before. However, during my rant, I stumbled upon some emotions that I really weren't expecting to come out. So I wanted to give that. If you're interested in listening to that, you can feel free to. I do have it right now for my Patreon supporters exclusively, because I do want them to feel like they get to see a bit more of me, especially since they're taking part in supporting my efforts. So if you're interested, definitely consider becoming a patron. Again, it's not a necessity, but yeah, if you would like to see more exclusive content, that's the place to find it. So again, as you can see, I'm really just kind of going through. I do end up compromising my second horn just so I have enough surface to play around with. Cutting that out really gives me a better idea of how I want to render this metal. And again, it's very rough right now. I honestly don't think it really looks like metal right now. But again, hopefully that can be taken care of after once I get this fully processed. One thing I do notice about metal properties is they do have a really intense value range. So you'll see darkest darks go to light, very, very light lights pretty quickly, and that is very hard to capture, but not impossible. Again, if you have good references, I think that's a great way to help process how the surface interacts with its environment, and you get a better understanding of how to do it by yourself. Because right now, yeah, again, it's very much just a guessing game at this point, and really would like to get that down a bit more, especially since armor is such a topic that I tend to come back to a lot, and it's a very fun material. Like I mentioned, actually I didn't mention this yet. This was in my previous video, so I'll get to that once we get there. But we'll keep following along here. See what I do. I think right now I don't really have a good value range, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I will go ahead and kind of develop that later on, as you'll see. Getting into the pauldrons here, the big old pauldrons, those might change a bit too. I don't know. I don't really like how they're laid out right now, but we'll see how that develops. And as you can see, I do tend to pull, like I mentioned before in my previous video, I like to pull values from already established places. So as you can see, I actually went to my metal surface and got my highlight and applied it to the metal just to give some consistency. And that really helps helps with the believability and establishes a good cohesion with your overall piece, in my opinion. But again, I think the pauldron didn't really turn out how I really wanted it to. Once this video ends, like I said before too, this is probably going to be a multi-part series. This isn't going to be just 2 videos. I do plan on maybe having 4 or maybe even more than that, but hopefully it doesn't take that much time to get a fully rendered painting, but we'll see. Kind of taking that at my own pace right now. Looks like I softened up my brush a bit here too, just so that I could help with some more of the reflective properties and kind of rendering it as more of a shinier material, and softening up your brush, and so that there aren't it isn't a hard edge, really helps with my rendering process, especially if there are bits that I'm uncertain of, or if they need to be softened up. That's the way to do it. It's common sense. I know, I'm sorry, I'm being repetitive, but that's the process. Looks like I go back to a hard brush to really get some separation of value. Separation of value is very hard when you're starting off. That was something that I had to really come away from, is lines and getting away from lines, which is ironic because now I feel like I would like to get back into more of a line work process, but that has since been relinquished and is no longer in my artistic vocabulary. Again, I started off very young with pencil and paper, and that was kind of my way of doing things, and so developing that as a young age, I was fairly adequate at it, and over time, especially during my schooling and my academic career, learned very much to step away from that, especially during my painting classes. It was very much no lines, and had to reteach myself kind of how to view things. And here I am now, wishing I had back what I had when I was younger. So it's not impossible, I don't believe, for me to get back into line work. However, I do have to, again, retrain my vision, and that's probably going to be hard to break, especially at this point in age. That's going to be a very difficult task for anybody to do, to relearn something, or to kind of throw aside something in order to come back to, or to learn a new process. And that just that takes a lot. So we'll see how that goes. Did get some practice in. Like I mentioned before, I do have a Patreon. I do a lot of exclusive work for that particular audience, because again, they do tend to support me and ensure my livelihood. So I've been going back to a lot of traditional work, trying out gouache, acrylic gouache, and going back into oil painting. I have a few commissions that I need to do for painting, but like I said, it's a relearning process, especially once since I've been so accustomed to a digital format for the past year or two, relearning some of the traditional methods is going to be an endeavor, but one that I hope you guys feel free to follow along in and enjoy watching me relearn. So as I mentioned before, I didn't mention this during this video, but the fact that I always tend to go with any kind of armored unit, I do tend to mix that with some kind of padded armor, or in this case, I'm planning on using this as a gambeson. So a padded fabric or a cotton fabric that's been layered provides some lightweight protection, but not as efficient as plate armor, obviously, because it's padded, it's cloth, but still provides a pretty substantial and flexible material to armor yourself with. So that's what I kind of chose for his mid-waist there. A good buddy of mine used to engage in HEMA, which is like a medieval martial art with long swords, short swords, you name it. And he has a gambeson. And so during my school career, I used his gambeson a lot for my art projects and got to learn about the frustrations of rendering fabric, and in particular this type of pattern. It was a cross pattern, so it had kind of diamond shapes, and you had to really be conscious of how the fabric folded and how to process that, and you learn a lot from that, and I'm hoping that I can recreate that in this piece here, although I might change it up too and make it into maybe a kind of like a layered sheet or plate armor instead. But I do like the idea of gambesons. I think they present an interesting aesthetic break from just having pure metal metallic plate armor. Having something padded and dull in comparison, again, kind of provides a nice little break from all the shiny metal that you're seeing and that your eyes taking in. But again, this is a very fun exploration. This is something that I don't do often, to be quite frank. This type of process where I'm basically using a single layer is one that I tend to partake in quite frequently, but in terms of making characters and such, I really haven't indulged in that in quite some time, so it's really fun to get back into the swing of that. Right now, as you can see, I am rendering or giving him a giant mace. It's very appropriate for a Rhino. I think maces are made to smash.
Lemme Smash.
And he can certainly do some damage with that type of weapon. So yeah, I've learned looking at really good concept artists that there is a method called photo bashing, which honestly I really hadn't been aware of, and was quite stunned when I saw it. I've tried it myself. It's something that I'll have to take some time to get in tune with, but it's a nice process. It's very fast, especially if you know what you're doing. If you're very savvy in Photoshop, you can whip conceptual art out really, really fast, and that's the point of that technique, is to be able to produce work in a very timely manner, especially if you're working for a company that needs that conceptual work fast and needs it to look good. So looks like I'm kind of pushing my values here. I'm really getting in a bright, and again, softened my brush up to give a very reflective property. More of a placeholder. This is definitely going to change, especially once I get a light source figured out, and hopefully that will better that'll give me a better understanding of how to tackle this surface, because again, it's a very metal is very finicky. You think it'll do things, but it honestly it doesn't end up doing what you want it to, and that can be frustrating. As you could see, I was zooming out to kind of get a better grasp of my values. I think it's a good thing to kind of step back once in a while just to make sure your values look straight, that it's not out of whack, and you're keeping everything balanced. I mean, there are some occasions where I feel like you could push your values to be unbalanced, especially in like a darker setting. If you're just rendering a dark room, or like a figure in a dark room, that would very much be an occasion where your values would be muted. But in this scenario, I do have a suggestion of a light source as of right now. Once I get that truly established, I think that will really help get it'll bring some dynamic to the piece. And looks like I'm going back in and finding some of the darkest darks. That's always a good thing to do prior to rendering fully. Something I failed to do on this piece here, but never too late. I can go back. Mentioning before too that a painting is a lot of push and pull, so a lot of this stuff is going to be temporary until I say it's done. But as of right now, again, just giving me a good basis of value to work from, and that should help really make things really easy to grasp and to give it some nice believability. And again, pushing and pulling. I didn't like how dark that ear was, so I went back and sampling from my armor to put in a lighter value. Kind of working quick, it looks like, too. Not really taking the time to get that down. Not a big deal. I think it's hard to render texture with a single brush. I've had some fun making my own brushes, and also finding brushes that fill in kind of a niche. And it's really cool it's really exciting when you find one that you're like, oh, I could use this for this, this, and this, because it gives you plenty of other options as well. You can kind of adapt your brush to do whatever. That's one of the big things that I've recently learned, is that the brush sets that you get online from these professional artists are basically just modified brushes that you already have. So it's kind of cool learning about that, but also intimidating, because you do have to learn how to make your own brush and all the doodads that go along with that. But worth learning, in my opinion, instead of paying $20 for a brush pack that, again, you could most likely make your own. You can make your own brush pack, and kind of if you can master that, then you can basically make any brush for any occasion. That's a handy thing to have. Again, very much looking forward to diving more into that and learning more about making brushes. I've done a couple, but they're not very dynamic. I do want to learn how to make more of like a dynamic brush to help me with my further projects, and also helping with texture. Like I said before, rendering with just a standard circle brush is good practice. Maybe not as efficient, and there are some occasions where I feel like, oh, this is going to be too much. I don't know if I'm going to be able to kind of handle this kind of texture. For example, tree bark. So if you can find a brush or make a brush that helps you accomplish that, by all means, that is something that I feel like is very useful, and you shouldn't steer away from that. But I'd like to learn more about that. I'm thinking he'll have a layer of fabric underneath too for his gauntlet or for his forearm protection. Golly, I know a lot about armor, but for some reason that piece is escaping. Bracers. Oh, thank goodness. Bracers. I was gonna look like a fool for a second. So thinking that he'll probably just have a fabric bracer. Nothing fancy. He kind of needs some space to swing that big old mace around and smash things and cause some havoc. So yeah, we'll keep that. We'll keep that. We'll keep that as fabric. Don't think I'll put in any armor. Again, could change. We'll see. We'll see what my brain tells me once I get to that point and go from there. Looking right now, I do notice that my hands are very uneven. One of them's very much bigger than the other, and I honestly don't really like how that hand that I'm working on right now is turning out. I may have to go back and erase it and try it again like I did before, but we'll find out. I believe I may have to. The perspective of the mace seems like the butt end where that ball or the pommel is facing more towards us, and the head of the mace is facing away from us. So I'll have to probably adjust his hands to help give that illusion that it's pulling farther away. Maybe not as extreme as I'm mentioning, but I'd like to get that changed because I feel like that's gonna give it a bit more of a dynamic. I've been trying to stray away from just cliche poses and not making things easy for myself. These projects I do want these projects to push my limits and help me get out of my comfort zone. I think that's a big part of learning anything, is trying something that you're not comfortable with and seeing how it goes. Maybe not for like extreme sports. Maybe it is for extreme sports. I couldn't tell you. I'm not a Olympian snowboarder or skateboarder. The best that I could do on a skateboard was an ollie, and that's about it. So that's the extent of my extreme sports career. I didn't want to break my hand. Obviously, this right hand of mine is very valuable, and it will hopefully take me a bit further in my career. Oh, look at that! I'm going the opposite direction. the perspective is kind of flipped. So, yeah, that wasn't a good move. I'll have to change that. Oh, what a mess! It's like bending in the center. I mean, it's convincing right now because it's not finished. But if I were to fully render that in, it would look goofy. It would look like the mace in the center, in between his hands, was bending. Which, I mean, he looks powerful enough to do that, but I don't want that to be a part of the painting right now. So, looks like I stopped there. Thank you for tagging along for another trip on my art journey, and hopefully we'll see you again. As you notice, I did put music in this time. Thank you to a shout out to Cat Pat. His YouTube channel is in the description, and I'll actually put it at the end of the video as well if you want to check out his stuff. He does a lot of tech modifications or retro modifications for systems. So if you're into that kind of stuff, give him a look. He was helping me out with my video editing, and can't be thankful enough. So thank you, Cat Pat. I will talk to you all later. Thank you. Ding dong.
Are you being silly? Are you being a silly girl?